Today, we are talking about RWE, RWD, and regulatory issues mainly abroad. I will be using English-based terms because they're shorter and much clearer, although I understand that wording in Russia is currently being approved. But definitely, it's difficult to get rid of English-based acronyms. So how do we use this data? Currently, the data could be used in 4 main directions: pharmacovigilance, and mainly we are talking about the clarification on safety data, then let's say market authorization, and definitely this is not new registrations, but new indications, new subpopulations, new alternative regimens of dosing. And on the next slide, I will explain why we are not speaking about the authorization itself, but we are speaking about only add-on authorization steps. Then clinical trials. Well, definitely here we mainly mean optimization of clinical trial design, keeping in mind real needs of the patients and patients' experience they gain during the treatment, and also healthcare technology assessment, HTA, but this is not quite regulatory, that's why I'll mention that briefly. So what is the experience using? Well, this is quite limited, but still very positive, and this positive experience, well, fosters the future development of
большинство заявлений на разрешение на продажу в США включают, так или иначе включают эти данные. Это не значит, что эти данные являются основным источником доказательств. Это не значит, что только на этом основе.
Most important. It doesn't mean that decisions are made only on that, decisions of regulators, but these data, they're important for different purposes, and they are included into the dossier. Similar here, a year before, the European agency got submissions, and 78% of FDA-approved files included already real-world evidence. More and more frequently, they use artificial intelligence within a lifestyle of the product, and this is very helpful for the real clinical practice, and there are good examples of successful approval of new indications in new populations in different diseases. And mainly here, these are some rare situations, orphan diseases, because of the real-world data normally allow us to see the bigger population and to see how one specific patient could react towards treatment, because we know in the clinical trials we are designing drugs with statistical point of view, and we look at median data, but in the real-world data, likewise in other new tools which are more and more frequently used, NF1 studies, more and more frequently we can individualize these pieces of evidence and to approve new indications and new dosings.
В своем выступлении так, нет, следующее это вот этот, да.
Yes, this slide, thank you. So we have 2 legal jurisdictions where we normally take inspiration to establish rules. So we look at the legislation of United States and European Union. Let me start from United States, because in their case, the development was a bit faster, because United States is a mono-jurisdiction, so there is no multiple approvals, so they managed to create it faster. Back in 2016, in fact, Barack Obama administration approved amendments to the law on drugs. This is so-called 21st Century Cures Act, where they introduced the framework, the structure, the model, the definition of real-world evidence. And actually, the same piece of law obliges FDA to take regulatory instructions. In European Union, it all goes slower because there are multiple members. Standardization is not an easy thing to do. And that is why today we are speaking about only on working plan, so action plan of the task force and priority guides. Action plan of task force and priority guides. So United States, let's look at 21st Century Cures Act. It introduces just one small section. Well, in our case, it will be article. And this is a law about the food drugs, DNCA. And in this section, 505F, they speak about the objectives, why and how real-world data and real-world evidence can be used. And this is approval of new indications for new drugs, and also the help to the justification requirements of post-registrational studies. And also there, you can enjoy the definitions. And this is data how to use and potential risks and benefits of drugs that are obtained not from clinical trials. So that's probably the most important definition. So in fact, we have two options how to use drugs. You can use it in experimental design, which is a clinical trial, and you can use it in a general non-regulated medical use, which could be routine clinical practice, or it could be, you know, some other less relevant and less interesting regimen. But this is not experimental. That's the most important. It's not a clinical trial. That's the most important. So what's the model? What's the framework? Well, framework probably more convenient word for Russia, and in Russian we hardly have equivalents. So these are frames. These are comprehensive frames. So what are the sources? Continuous safety study, observational registers, and patient-centered approaches. What are the challenges? Definitely gaps in the data collection, in the continuity. Also standards and methodology could have some gaps, and actually challenges and opportunities which also should be considered. So in fact, in this article, we see the big picture, So the issues are formulated, and they're saying that these are the challenges that exist, and later on, regulator is going to resolve them. Here you see some notification for FDA industry. According to law, they had to approve multiple documents that would regulate. These are those issues related to the RWE, RWD. So currently, you see multiple documents, at least seven documents, and 2 of them are already in a final version, and 5 of them are drafts. But according to the law, the drafts are to be approved by the end of 2023. So here you see very different aspects of RWD, RWE regulations. So how this data could be used for the decision-making for medical devices, the use of electronic health record data, standards for drugs and biological products, submissions containing real-world data, also assessing registries, and a lot of efforts on data standardization, how to get standardized data, how to analyze the data, how to interpret. So we see 2 very large vectors for the development. So how these results can be worked and how they are included into the decision-making of the regulator. And on the other hand, what can be done? What can be done to make good quality data that you can rely on? So all these documents are to regulate all these issues. And now we are coming to the EU. European Union. So this is joint action plan of the task force on big data, EMA and HTA, European Medical Agency and Health Technology Assessment. So this action plan is not just the result of European regulator, but this is also the result of drug regulator and another regulator that is responsible for healthcare technology assessment. So that's a joint project of the task force, because these results would later on be used not only by drug regulators. And here we can immediately appreciate the plan. So this plan is split into 3 slides. We see very long and very bulky processes. So the relevant plan started in 2022, which acts until 2025. You see different activities, strengthening of so-called Darwin assessment, that is a program for real-world data collection. Then there is work ongoing on the quality and representation of the data, on discoverability of data. And the next slide is the continuation. You see efforts to develop skills of regulatory networking, scientific networking, processes which are ongoing within networking. They look at opportunities of the network to analyze the data which is provided by experts. And here we see, if we dive deeper, here we see that different documents are planned and scheduled, and different guides that on the one hand should standardize this data. You see dictionaries and lists of data sources, and there are attempts to standardize them now and to launch pilot projects in different diseases. So there is clear integration with the pharmacovigilance databases, with the system of decision-making, particular committees of European agency where the regulatory decisions are made. Also, analytics is involved with artificial intelligence, etc., etc. Here you also consider different activities on the structure of management. You see international initiatives and European agencies playing a very active role here, and big attention is paid to stakeholders. That means all stakeholders, all involved parties. So this is not just the work of a regulator, but also active role is played by the medical community, by the industry, and I wouldn't say that regulator is playing a passive role, but the regulator is not the lead. The regulator is mainly actually working hand in hand with others, because everybody needs it as well as a regulator, and different solutions can be offered from the medical community as well. And also Europeans, they don't forget veterinary, because they also have some drugs and they use these drugs for vet options and medicinal devices. Here you see priority recommendations, priority guides, and actually they met the points in the previous 3 slides. Now these priority guides are updated. So for the first time, they were published back in 2020, as well as the schedule. Currently, we are in 2022, and the movement is going proactively. That's very effective movement, and there are no delays. So in each slide, you can see what's going on, but what conclusion can be made? The process is actively ongoing. So it's a global, everything is done, lots of specialists from all sides, from the side of a regulator and the industry and scientific and academic communities that are working on that, and they're actively involved patient communities. And here, on the one hand, we see the scales of this process, but on the other hand, we see the clear plan. Plans are executed, and we see this interaction in between different elements. That means between the optimization of decision-making, information standardization, modernization of expert consultations, etc. So previous 3 slides, as well as this slide, should show us what is a serious attitude in Europe to this work, and how many activities are planned, and how all is rolled into one singular system, one system, which is supposed to be very strong. And this is my final slide here. So these are acronyms, very useful acronyms. Oh, there are so many acronyms here. And now take-home messages. So my conclusion here. So by now, RWE is one of the drivers for the drug design, as well as medical devices. And there are comprehensive systems for standardization, collection, processing, and analysis of medical data, and the quality of data actually guides the approval. The industry is the active lead here, and the purpose is move together. The theory of design and the practice of use were coming closer and closer to the patients, and this is how we see that earlier decisions that were made at the stage of development could later on influence the outcomes, the experience that patients get after being treated. But moreover, now, due to the fact that we are coming closer to the patients, now we can provide more information to the earlier stage of development in order to close this circle.
здесь отметить, что
And also here, I wanted to mention that real-world data and real-world evidence is not an additional activity. This is complete transformation of pharmaceuticals and life science in general.